So leadership is not necessarily a title.
Like completely agree on the title side. And I think we use the title as an excuse. And that excuse is
for what?
Meaning I'm the leader, you should do what I say.
Right.
Because my leadership capability is not strong enough.
Just because I have the title.
Because I have the title, my leadership ability is not strong enough, so I'm going to enforce that. Conversely, say, oh, not my decision, I'm not the leader. Well, on the other side of that, you have complete influence around what the people are going to do.
Welcome to ReedFlections, a podcast on life, leadership, and learning. I am Art Calderon. I am here with Reed Nyffeler. He's a CEO of a global franchising security firm here out of the heartland of America. He's a husband, a father, and now a published author. Pretty amazing. Season 2 is going to be about developing authentic and intentional leaders, Reed. I'm sure you're aware. Episodes 1 through 4, all about why develop leaders. Why do we do that? Now, episode 1, which we're launching today, live-ish, is a potential to see and maximize potential. Now, Reed, tell us why developing leaders is important.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And of course, as far as I'm concerned, we are live. They may not hear this live, but you and I are living and breathing right
alive.
here. So I feel alive. So then why develop leaders? And I think that's a real question is ultimately what happens when we don't? I think one thing we can all agree is that with better leaders, our lives are better. With no leaders, our lives may or may not be better. With bad leadership, typically our lives are not better. And so in the end, if we want our lives and the lives of those environments that we're touching to be better, we need to develop better leaders. And it's almost that simple. And so then why to do it means we never, I remember being born.
You do?
Well, certainly I see photos of it all, and I got a height and a weight that I'm certainly bigger than at the time. And so, but I wasn't born a leader. And so I developed as a leader. And I think early on, and we're going to talk about this, is either one, there were some leadership traits already inside me that I decided to develop on my own, which may be the case for many of you, or two, others saw leadership opportunities and influence that I had, and they developed me as a leader. And so either of those circumstances can be present to make us the best leaders that we are. But either way, we can't just assume that because we're born, we're going to be effective in our role. We've got to develop our skill, right? Just as if in anything, there might be somebody that's a natural athlete, but if they don't learn the particular sport they're performing in, they aren't going to be at the top performing, even if they're naturally more athletic than somebody else. And so that's why we develop leaders, is because no matter if they're ready to be a leader or not, they can always be developed to be a better leader in that circumstance.
Now, not everybody strives to be a leader, but a lot of people do. And some of those people do that for the wrong reasons, right? Now, before we get into what are the right reasons, what are some of the wrong reasons people decide, I want to be a leader?
And first and foremost, I think I would say everyone is a leader. And why do I say that? Well, you're leading yourself.
Okay.
Right? At the very least, a leader, by its most simplistic definition, either has influence or is influencing a decision. Well, I would argue that everyone influences their own decision by the way they think, act, or live. And so they're leading themselves. And then as they lead themselves, others will respond. Even if you are a hermit in the middle of nowhere, the animals or the environment will respond to your decisions, right? So if you're in that environment, and so ultimately, even someone that doesn't interact with anyone is leading, and they're leading themselves.
But for most of us, we interact with at least some people, so there's some influence there, so there's some leadership there for everybody.
Whether it's your family, whether it's a person at work, or someone you just interact with at a grocery store. So everyone at some level is a leader, and then ultimately, there are bad leaders, and we don't want to develop bad leaders. And so what constitutes a bad leader? And in my framework, as I'm investing in and or intend to develop other leaders, I'm looking at it for people that are not aligning with my purpose, number one, which we discussed in season 1, which you can go back and look at. And number 2, are doing it for the wrong reasons, right? There are a series of leaders, which I will not name, throughout history of the world that we would consider were people that had ill-gotten objectives. However, we could argue they were good leaders.
So they had the skill to be a leader, but they had a character flaw.
Correct.
Right? And they used that skill for bad intent.
So if we look at historical wars, is a good place to start. There are people that are doing it for the sake of their own expansion of their proverbial kingdom at the expense of others' lives, right? That did not mean that life would be better. And so those are people that have leadership skills, but they're bad leaders to develop. because the purpose they're trying to achieve is to conquer their own community or the neighboring community or anything they would have been conquering. And that would have been to the detriment of the people afterwards, right? They're an oppressive leader, said another way. So we don't want to develop their skills.
Right.
You do not want to give an oppressive leader better skills to oppress more people.
Yeah.
It's really because of their mission or vision. Their mission or vision is designed to be oppressive, self-serving or controlling. We don't want to develop their skills because what are they going to do with it? They're going to become self-serving to a greater degree. They're going to enforce their objectives on other people, and ultimately the leadership environment's not better.
So why is it important to find people that have leadership potential and develop them? I mean, you're busy, you got a lot of things going, you're running a company. Why devote more time finding people who have this little bit of leadership potential and developing them?
I think time is the right answer, right? Because one thing I cannot create, or anyone can create, is more time, right? I mean, no matter whether I am here today or tomorrow, it's still 24 hours, right? And ultimately, that's the time. So then that's the one resource. I have two resources I can manage: my energy, and I apply that to time. So then if I'm saying, okay, where is going to get the greatest return of my energy? So, certainly if we look at energy producing things, we can see that energy, when encapsulated, will go very far, right? So if we put energy into walking, right, we're going to go a little distance. But if we sit on a bike and apply that same energy, are we going to go further faster?
You bet. Yeah.
And so the choice is, where do we apply that energy? I can do it walking. I can get from point A to point B. But if I get on a bike and pedal, that's much more efficient use of energy than it is walking. And so that's the same thing with our time. Where am I going to get the greatest returns? So just as I decide where do I want to go, and I can determine the means of transportation, the same thing is, where do I see my purpose going? And the means of helping me get there is determining the people that are worth investing that time into to develop. And so it's super critical that we recognize that the investment of time we're doing it. Now, if I invest in the wrong person, I'm missing an opportunity to invest in someone that is worth investing in. And so I need to choose the right person on the front end. It's less about the time we invest. And the first selection is, who should we invest that time with?
I remember as a kid at church, I was friendly with everybody, as I am kind of now, friendly with a lot of people, but I never thought of myself as being any sort of leader. And there was an adult leader at the time. He walked up and says, "You know what? You're a leader." So what do you mean? So I see the way you interact with everybody. And what he meant was, I have influence over everybody. And that's the first time it occurred to me that leader does not necessarily mean the traditional, I'm up in front, I'm delegating, I'm directing, I'm setting up all the programs. It means influence. So to me, that was really an opening in the way that I thought about leadership, and to your point, that it's having influence on others. So leadership is not necessarily the title. I mean, in fact, it's not about the title. There's plenty of people who have titles that are not good leaders, or they need other people who don't have the title but have the influence and are also leaders. Who first noticed that potential in you?
Yeah, first of all, I completely agree on the title side. And I think we use the title as an excuse. And that excuse is
for what?
Meaning, I'm the leader, you should do what I say.
Right.
Because my leadership capability is not strong enough.
Just because I have the title.
Because I have the title, my leadership ability is not strong enough, so I'm going to enforce that. Conversely, say, oh, not my decision, not the leader. Well, on the other side of that, you have complete influence around what the people are going to do. And so that leads to the initial story of where it was first noticed. And, obviously, as we look back later in life, we have a better understanding when that might have otherwise happened. And as this kind of came together, I think it was very early on, probably in, 5 to 7 years old. Because why do I say that? Because a couple of instances. One, I have a brother 1 year older and a brother 1 year younger. And I remember distinctly when we were being maybe disciplined, or maybe, as I always like to refer to those disciplined environments young, I had my first one-on-one with my two brothers sitting on either side of me. Because in those circumstances, your parents would come and say, "What happened here?" And they'd be looking right at me like, "What do you mean, what happened here?" We're all here, right? And ultimately in that thing, my mom already had identified, and certainly my dad, that, Reed, you are having a huge influence on your older and younger brother as to what happens here. And so I'm like, why is she looking at me so much? There's two other people on either side. You can talk to them too. You know what I mean? And so early on, as a parent, we recognize which child may have influenced what decision. right? And knew which one to get on board first on the other side. Secondarily, at that early age, it was similar when we're outside. So we're outside, and I could clearly see that we're like, well, what should we do today? Right? And they're looking at me. And then they're saying, what should we do today? I'm like, what do you mean, what should we do today? You're looking at me. And so generally speaking, they were looking at me as the leader that would decide, hey, let's go play baseball, or let's go play basketball, or let's go do whatever we're going to do. And so if we look back in our lives and you think of those environments that you may be in as well, I think many people were in those same environments, but at one point or another, they got insecure about that role.
Yeah.
Where they could have said in a school classroom, right? I remember, and give another examples in early childhood, there's influence in a classroom. And are you having influence? Hey, do you know the answer? Do you raise your hand, right? I would be one that would raise my hand and ask questions and do so with confidence. Well, that drew the team there. And then you'd hear people say, well, that's what I agree with what he said. Well, I'm already having influence because I'm suggesting things that were on their ways there. So I think even early on, they saw that, teachers, parents, and peers. And I think if you look around that and say, okay, am I a leader? Wait a minute. Did a teacher, a parent, or a peer influence me or identify me as a leader or suggest or ask me questions, and or did I change a behavior? And that's usually where your leadership journey starts, is around those areas. And then you can see it kind of build from there.
And your peers would sort of defer to you as you got older, and
Right.
you didn't shy away from that. Because like you said, sometimes people would like, oh, I don't want to be a leader. I don't like to have people ask me.
Instead of shying away from it, I invest in it. And I'll give an example. I remember, and when my kids are 12 years old, I go on a trip with them one-on-one, and I happened to just recently go with my youngest son, and he chose to go to Alaska. And while we're there, I say, here's the reality of life, and I've learned this. I said, if you're in a group of people, someone is choosing what to do. In your middle school years, someone may choose something that's not, a good choice. It might be any number of bad choices. I said, but someone chose that. I said, in those environments, if you are the one choosing it, it more likely will be in alignment with your values versus the person you're deferring to, which could be in alignment with their values.
Right.
So I encourage you to vocalize what you would like to do. And that is an example of influence and leadership. And that's something I'm investing in them in, because if you look around 10 middle schoolers, there could be varied answers depending on who's in that group, right?
Yeah.
But if I'm encouraging my 10-year-old, in this case, 12-year-old, to be the one that suggests something in alignment with their values, I am less concerned about what they do as a parent than someone else that I'm not aware of the values that they align with.
So speaking of values, when you are looking for someone to develop, do you look at leadership skills and these values? Will you talk about what you're looking for and what's the difference and how do those compete and how one may have one and not the other?
Yeah, so this is more specifically for me, but also can be applied for others. But ultimately, is their purpose in alignment with my purpose? Not the same, but in alignment. Are we directionally going the same? And so first and foremost, that's what I'm looking for. Because, for example, if someone wants to become a better artist, I'm not the person to develop you as a leader, right? If you want to be at the forefront of painting, I would just refer to the YouTube. That's my leadership. I can show you how to log in, and you can watch other good painters. So it needs to be in my life. It would be not as enjoyable for me, et cetera, et cetera. So then this podcast is a good example of people that I'm trying to invest in, right? That may be so in a passive way, but I'm looking for people that care about improving their lives through leadership opportunities and learning. And so those are the people I'm first looking at it categorically. Then if it's passive, it's an opportunity like this, but then active, meaning I meet with them regularly. So I had an individual, and this individual came to me and he goes, Reed, I'm leadership lonely. I said, okay, what does that mean? He said, I got plenty of friends. I have plenty of opportunities, but I'm leadership lonely. He said, I believe that I'm running a direction. I've surpassed those who are around me, basically. And I can't find other leaders that would challenge me to be better because the nature of where it's at, right? And if we look at pro sports, that happens all the time, right? I mean, an NBA player, who do you think they want to play with? Other NBA players. And of course, all the kids. I mean, you'll get countless high school kids that want to play against you, right? They always want to play. But at the same time, what are you learning in that environment, right? I mean, how are you getting better in that environment? And so that's what he's saying. He's leadership lonely. And so then I recognize, okay, and so he sought me out as a result. He said, you're someone that's, I believe, is ahead of me in a leadership capacity, and I want to learn from you and work through it. And I said, okay, thank you for coming forward. And I looked at it, okay, of course I get those requests from time to time. And I said, okay, what are you going to do with it? right? And so that's the first question when you're deciding who you develop is why and what. What are you going to do with it, and why would I develop in you?
What are you going to do with your leadership skills?
If I develop you, if I build your skills, where do you want to go, right?
Yeah.
If you're a coach of a high school basketball player saying, where do you want to go with this? Well, I just like to be really good and be part of a team, right? Or I want to go to the NBA. Well, those are two different development cycles.
Right.
And so then I'm going to ask him, where does he want to go with it? And why do they want to be developed? And so what am I listening there? One, why do you want to be developed is the more critical question to whether I choose. Where do you want to go with it? It determines the level of time and investment and the multiplication effect. So the why is the first and most important. He was saying so they can empower and develop other leaders. Well, okay, that's a multiplication effect.
Mm-hmm.
The where do you want to go with it as far as that will take me? So there was no limitation, right? So sometimes in the where they'd say, well, I want to develop this one particular leader so that gives me the ability to step away and, relax, whatever the case might be. In this case might be so I can multiply my effort. Well, now I'm sitting there saying, okay, I can multiply in this case. I have someone that has a clear and understanding of why to then multiply in my context of life, leadership, and learning. And then where do they want to go with it? Would multiply that in multiple contexts. And so me touching one can touch 1,000 instead of just investing in one.
We get a lot of young talent come through the office here. A lot of folks that are in college or right out of college. Talk a little bit about that, because that's intentional. Am I right? I mean, they don't just happen to all come here, but you actively try and seek out some of this young talent and development. Talk a little bit about what that looks like.
Obviously in accordance with my purpose, I want to develop leaders. And if you look at somebody in their 18 to 22 range, which is the college interns we typically have here, they have a long leadership journey ahead. And I know they can craft and create environments in the future if they aspire to be leaders for other people later. And that's ultimately an investment I have in the next generation. And so I've seen and managed and led multiple internship programs. And what I realize is the process is super important to establish first. Then you recruit the person. So what do I mean by that? And we'll talk and unfold this through a series of this whole podcast. But essentially saying there's got to be a process to develop that leader, because if you bring a leader in with high potential and you don't have a process, they don't know where to develop. I'm just giving them a series of tips. Hey, next time do X, Y, and Z, and all the other, and they're not linear or progressive in that development, right? Just like any great coach, they have a leadership development process or a coaching process. And so that's the first step. So I spend time first and foremost before even offering a position. And what is the process for that internship? How will they learn, and what is the outcome they're trying to achieve? Then the second, and the most important, especially for interns or super young leaders, is humility, willingness to learn, and then to apply. And if they don't have all three, it's not a good use of my time. And so I was recently doing a training, and the feedback after the training was, how was the training? Oh, it validated everything I knew.
It validated everything?
It validated everything I knew. Not going to invest in that leader again.
They already knew it.
Right. Now, reverse saying is, wow, I got something out of that. I can't wait to go apply it. And here's what I'm going to do next. Now, which learner do you want to invest in?
Oh, yeah.
It validated what I already knew, or wow, I got something out of that and I can't wait to apply it.
Right.
That is merely one sentence. And that one sentence that communicates their whole disposition about development.
Very good. Well, we're out of time. Thank you all very much for joining us. We talked about the potential that you need to look for when you are developing leaders. Find some leaders that have the skill set, have the potentials, have the values that align with yours, and develop them. Thank you all again very much for listening. Reed, thank you for your time. Now, next time, episode 2, experiential leaders create strong experiences. All about experiences. We'll see you next time. And remember, live on purpose.